there's a few things you have to think about when you're playing daily fantasy. And I used to play poker. I was a professional poker player. And there's some things that correlate. I think about it like a Venn diagram, the two circles. And there's some of those things that intersect. It's not a total overlap, but there are some things that do. And one of them was, one of the most important things from poker. Everybody says, if I asked you what's the most important thing in DFS, usually people go, making a lot of money, win all the money. So it's nice, but how do you get there? So the most important thing in DFS, much like the most important thing is poker, was making good decisions. So making good decisions is, to me, the key to daily fantasy, understanding the why. Why are you making the decisions that you're making? Why are you picking player X to be in your lineup today over player Y? What makes him a better play? Or why are you fading player X to get to player Y? What's the decision that you're making to get to that point? Because if it's just rudimentary, like, well, I kind of like him today, it's probably not the best math decision of why you're getting there. So you have to understand why you're getting to that point. So we're going to work on all that today, trying to help you understand the why behind these decisions that you guys are making in your daily lineups. I'm going to be talking to you about GPP strategy today. As I said, I was the Tournament Player of the Year in 2013. I was fortunate enough last night to win the 3-ball on DraftKings. GPP is a guaranteed prize pool tournament where the sites have to put up the money ahead of time. Okay? This is going to be guaranteed. It's going to go off whether they fill it or it doesn't fill. If it doesn't fill, that's what we call overlay, where the site has to put up X amount of dollars that's over the entry fees that have been paid into the prize pool that day. They are on the hook for whatever they say the guaranteed prize pool is. So if they post a tournament for opening day, DraftKings has a $500,000 guaranteed prize pool tournament. They have a $100,000 guaranteed prize pool tournament. If those don't fill, if they only get $400,000 in entry fees into that $500K, the site is responsible for the other $100,000 to pay that out to the prize pool. So that is what a guaranteed prize pool means. To me, a guaranteed prize pool is a tournament or a game that pays out less than 33% of the field. You have 50-50s, those pay out half the field. Head-to-heads, half the field. 3-man games pay out 1/3 of the field. So anything that pays out like 20%, 5-man games, most GPPs, most tournaments pay out between 15 and 18% of the prize pool to the people that cash. So that's what I determine a GPP, and that's what helps me make my decisions later in that tournament. Now, cashing a GPP isn't enough. So if you finish in like the top 16%, you get into the money, but you don't get real deep into the tournament. You're basically going to maybe double your entry fee. Sometimes you're going to increase it by like 75 or 80%. You get an ROI of a positive 70% ROI, which is nice, but you could have done that in a 50-50. The point is, these are really, really high, top-heavy tournaments. So you got to get into the top 10. So you're going to have to take some chances. We're going to talk about how to get there. So, should you play the chalk, the popular plays? Or should you go contrarian and try and grab somebody that nobody else is on that day? And there's a lot of conversation of, should I go contrarian or should I play the chalk? And it's like, which one is right? And the answer is that neither one is right. It's like at the end of the day, they pay out who scores the most points, not who has the lowest total. It's not golf. The lowest total of added up percentage points. So sometimes it makes the right decision. If somebody's going to be, say, 50% owned, and that player goes off for a ton of points, the guy that's 50% on a tournament has 2 home runs and 4 RBI, you probably had to have that guy in your lineup because you're going to leave 50% of the field behind. Or if that guy that's 50% owned goes 0 for 4, then you've got a leg up on that 50% of the field who just fell behind. Knowing where that is not the important part. Knowing how to make the decision getting to that point is. So, one, you have to be able to kind of read where you think the percentages are going to be on a player. Now, in the middle of basketball season to now, to the end of basketball season, the percentages kind of swing upward because there's less people playing. The people that are still playing are players that have generally done well over the season or know what they're doing. So they're going to be on the best plays more heavily than at the beginning of the season. So the percentage owned goes up on a lot of players. So knowing what those percentages are going to be or having a ballpark, being within 5% either way. If you have Paul Goldschmidt at home against a left-handed pitcher, what is his percentage owned going to be that day in a guaranteed prize pool tournament? What do you think? How many people are going to have this guy? The more you play, the more you're going to be able to accurately figure out what that is, and then we're going to be able to make a decision based on what we project their percentage owned number to be. How do ownership percentages differ from NBA and NFL to baseball? There's a larger number of scoring opportunities in NBA. There's 70 possessions a game, and certain players will play 30, 35 minutes out of the 48 possible in an entire game. So they've got an awful lot of possessions, and you can score on both sides of the floor. You can score on offense, obviously. You can score on defense. Defense, rebounds, steals, blocks. Football, there's also more possessions. There's more opportunities. The best wide receivers get 12 to 15 targets. A quarterback throws it 50 times a game. A running back gets 30 touches. Baseball, hitters get like 4. They have 4 at-bats a day. So a great decision, a great play that day. This guy's got a great matchup that day. He gets 4 opportunities to make good on that. Now, he gets 4 plate appearances, and you're making most of your decisions in baseball on your hitters versus the starting pitcher that he's facing. He's really only going to get 3 opportunities against that starting pitcher. Their 4th is generally going to come against the bullpen unless that pitcher has been lights out, and if that happened and he gets a 4th at-bat against him, your guy probably didn't do as well as you had hoped he would. So generally speaking, you have an extremely small sample to make good on your investment on a player on that day. Now, think about this. A great baseball player fails 70% of the time. Hall of Famers, all-stars. They hit 300, everybody thinks they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Basketball players, if a guy's going to be 60, 65% owned, there's a good chance that they're going to come through 70% of the time. Like last night, in the tournament that I was speaking about, Anthony Davis from the Pelicans was 50, 52% owned in that tournament. I'm going to get into exactly my decision-making in a minute, but I felt that based on his salary, his chance to score over 50 fantasy points last night was greater than 50%. But if I think a hitter is going to be 30% to 40% owned, there's a lot of merit in fading that hitter. So the way that I break down, the way that I research baseball is different than the way that I do basketball. Basketball, it's very easy to project points. Football, you can project touches. You can say, how many points per touch does this guy get? How many fantasy points per minute does this guy score in basketball? And then you just project the minutes and you multiply, right? And you can figure out a dollar per point basis. Baseball is different. Like I said, way less opportunities, smaller sample size. They have 4 at-bats, and they really have to capitalize when they're there. So for me, I'm looking at what percent above the average does this guy have per opportunity? Is this guy a 30% above average play today? Is he a 20% above average play? Is he just an average play? And then the highest percent above average guys are usually going to be the highest percentage owned guys, and then you have to make that decision of where are you going to project his percentage owned number to be, and does that number correlate, how does it correlate with his advantage on that day? Looking at starting pitchers, like I said, they're different from hitters. The percentages on the pitchers, I'm way more willing to take a high percentage on pitcher because 3 outs per inning, average league whip is like 1.32, so they're going to face 4.32 batters per inning. The average start is just under 6 innings. It's like 5.8 or something like that from the last 2 seasons on average. Starting pitchers generally will face 26 batters per start, way more than 4 at-bats. So they have a lot more opportunity to capitalize on their advantages if they're facing a lineup that it's a right-handed pitcher in a pitcher's park and they don't hit a lot of home runs and they strike out a ton. The Mets, the Braves from the last couple of seasons come to mind. Pitching in Petco Park versus pitching in Coors Field. Places that mute runs versus places that accelerate runs. The percentage that I'm willing to accept on a pitcher is way higher than the number I'm willing to accept on a hitter. Pitchers are also, for that reason, more projectable in terms of their points. You could say this pitcher I really realistically think today is going to go 6.5 innings with 8 strikeouts, maybe 2 earned runs, and should be in line for a win. Well, you add all those stats up, and all of a sudden you've got a projectable, a reasonable projection for that pitcher on that day. And when I do projections, they're not set in stone. I look at everything like a bell curve. You talk about floors, you talk about ceilings, right? What's the best possible outing this guy can have? Well, like, pitchers can have a perfect game with 15 strikeouts, but like that's not realistic. Those aren't like that's 100 percentile of that guy's start. I'm looking at the meat of the bell curve when I do a projection for a pitcher, for a floor and a ceiling. I want to know, okay, if he has a bad start but not a total blow up, he went 4 innings with 5 earned and 6 Ks. If he had a good start but not a great start, what's the average start? That's the meat of the bell curve. And then his realistic ceiling, okay, maybe he goes 7.5, maybe 8 innings with 10 or 11 Ks and a win. So once I work into that and I have a range of projections for that pitcher that day, also helps me make that decision on what I want to do with that pitcher on that day. Now, how do we apply this decision-making strategy based on percentage owned to baseball? So If you think the chance for a player to reach the score that you need from him on that day, or you think the advantage that a hitter has on that day is going to be greater than the percentage owned number that you project for that player on that day. Say you have a hitter that should succeed 34% of the time and you think he's going to be 22% owned. People say, well, he's going to be 22, 25% owned. I should fade that guy. Well, no, you're on the right side of the math because your guy's going to come through 35% of the time. So go ahead and play that player in a GPP. Now, if you think that this player, oh, this guy's in Coors Field today, he's going to be 45% owned in a GPP, but even with the park effect and everything else, I have him said he's going to come through like 35% of the time. There's a lot of merit in fading that guy. Okay, even though he's a very popular play, even though at the time that lineup's locked, you know that everybody else is on him. Every article you've read throughout the day says that this is the play, this is the guy you have to have today. In GPPs, especially in baseball, you don't have to have that guy. There's probably somebody on your projection sheet, 1 or 2 or 3 spots lower, that instead of being 35% owned or 40% owned, it's going to be 15% owned, 10% owned, 5% owned, but have a percentage of coming through for you, a percent above average of 20 or 25 or 30%. But he's not the absolute best play based on the math. But versus the tournament math, versus the percentage owned, he has way more of an advantage for you because he's going to have a lower percentage, less people in the tournament are going to be on him, and he has an above average matchup against the pitcher or the park that he's facing. Maybe the lineup effect around him is great. Maybe the pitcher has been slumping. Any of those sort of things that happen makes that a better tournament play. Cash games are different, and we're going to have guys that will talk to you about that. So that's how I'm looking to be contrarian in a tournament in baseball. I'm looking to play guys maybe that are out of my top 1 or 2 at each position. And that's a great way to go about building a tournament lineup for baseball. Do your projections. Look at your lineup sheets. If you have a cheat sheet, if you subscribe to one of the services that our panel has, if you're a Fantasy Bootcamp subscriber and you see the projections that I have up on the sheet that are basically from my sheet, you want to build a tournament lineup? Cross off the top 3 guys at every hitter position. Just ignore them. Pick from the other guys. It may not be the absolute best percent. It may not be a guy that's 35% above average matchup. Maybe a guy that's 23% above average. But that guy's going to be 5% owned. The top guy's going to be 35% owned. So your advantage versus the field is way greater. Selecting a guy that still has a plus matchup but isn't the most favored choice on that day. Because like I said, there's 4 at-bats. Guys can run into one, especially guys that have a positive matchup. Guy can hit a home run, maybe has 4 RBIs and a double. The guy that was favored has a solo home run in the first inning and goes 0 for 3 in his next 3 at-bats, and your guy was 4 or 5% owned. The guy that was 35%, everybody's happy he hit a home run, but your guy did better. So it's about the decision making, it's about the process. It's not about the result, but it's about putting yourself in that position day after day after day so that you can be in a position to take down these large GPPs. Like I said, you can do that with the chalk. You can play the chalk guy and he comes through for you. But if you're on the right side of the math with the chalk, it's going to make a better decision for you. Now, like I said, this also applies to pitchers. If a pitcher is going to be like 80% owned, he better be able to come through on my projection 81% of the time. So Kershaw in Petco, again, or in Citi Field against the Mets, or at home against the Mets, should be able to come through on his projected number versus his salary. He's going to be extremely highly owned on those days. Whatever you project the number to be, figure out what is the next 1 or 2 guys. Do they have a better chance to come through on their projected number so that you can have an advantage over the field? Because even if Kershaw comes through, it may be he came through and it was the wrong side of the math. So getting good at projecting the percentage owned is really one of the biggest keys for me. Now, big hot button item, multiple lineups. You can enter a lot of these tournaments. Some of them are single entry. You can enter those. If you want to play against other people that are playing single entry, enter the single entry tournaments. They have them at every single buy-in level. Okay? On DraftKings, they have a 25 cent, a $1, a $5, a $10, all the way up to $100 single entry GPP. And it's basically like the 50-50s that are single entry, except it's top heavy, like a tournament pays out top 18% of the field. You're not facing people that go after a ton of lineups. I multi-enter tournaments as well. Generally speaking, on a given day, I enter 2 or 3, I think 3 to 4 lineups a day in basketball. I entered 3 lineups last night on DraftKings. I had 3 lineups on FanDuel last night, and that's the way that I go after it. I kind of do a little bit more in baseball because it's easier to manage more lineups in baseball. The lineups come out earlier during the day, but you don't have to have this massive amount of lineups. And in the tournaments that I enter, there's guys that have 20, 30, 50 lineups. You can still compete because a lot of the lineups that somebody's making, if they're taking 30, 50 shots, some of the time people aren't looking at it the right way. Okay? They're going about building those lineups, people call them dart throws. I'm just going to do this in case it hits. Those lineups, more often than not, like 99% of the time, end up in the bottom 10% of the tournament. It's just dead money. So it's not like it's a great strategy. Yeah, you can hit with a dart throw lineup, but more often than not, you're just investing money that really has no chance of a return. It's got a negative expected value. You're putting in one entry lineup with an expectation of getting back 1 out of 100. So the other side of it is when you enter more lineups into tournaments, you're increasing your risk versus the ROI. Some of the tournaments have 100 times the price, the entry fee to first place. Some have 1,000 times the entry fee to first place. Then obviously second place is like 30 times the entry fee, and down from there as you go down the pay ladder. So the more entries you put in, the less EV you have with each entry, less expected value you have of getting back with each entry. So covering all the bases is not exactly the best idea. So it's impossible to do in a GPP. DraftKings, you need 2 starting pitchers, and they're going to have to fit with the hitters. And a lot of people like to try and cover a bunch of different bases, play a bunch of different plays. I'm going to have 10 different first basemen. I'm going to play all these different teams. I'm going to play most of the players from the 15 games on a day. They're going to try and play one lineup for every team and cover every single team that they can. And they also have to match them up with the pitchers. Not necessarily your best attack. If you're going to enter multiple lineups, focus on a core. Find your players that you like the best on that day, that have the matchups that you like, that you think have a great advantage that day, that you think, like we talked about before with the percentage owned number, if you think that, okay, these guys put me in the best advantage position in a tournament, and focus on a few of them, and then cycle them through your different lineups together to get different combinations of that core, as opposed to just using a shotgun strategy, load it with buckshot, shoot it, see if anything hits the bullseye. This way presents you more opportunities to get your core on the days that your core hits. That whole core of lineups moves up the field. If you're overweight on a player or underweight on a player, meaning their percentage owned is X. If you have 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the percentage owned number, you're considered overweight on that player. If a guy is 15% owned, but you're taking a stand and you have him in 60% of your lineups. If you know a guy's going to be 30% owned and you're fading him, you have 1 of him or 0 of him. You're completely fading that player. You're underweight on that player. As you make your decisions and stick to what your decision-making process leads you to, your core, as it performs, will move your entire bulk of lineups up throughout the standings and give you a chance at first place, give you the best chance at first place. Which, as we said, top 3 is where all the money is in these GPPs. You have to take your best shot at getting into the top 3. In my opinion, focusing on your core is the best way to do it. Like I said, don't be afraid to take a stand on a player versus the projected own number. This is something that I did constantly during football season. I didn't get fortunate enough to take down one of the Millie Makers on DraftKings this year, but I had 4 top 25 finishes. All those top 25 finishes were within 15 fantasy points of first place. So I was within the ballpark because my core lineups were doing well enough to give me a shot that one of those other guys in the lineup had, if he had one more touchdown, like a 40-yard touchdown catch or something, it puts me in position to compete for the championship that day. Same thing in baseball. If you take a stand on a player that's 10% owned, but you think he's a 20 or 25% play, and the field doesn't have him, like I said, 18% of the field cashes, that guy hits 2 home runs that day because you made a very good decision on that player versus the projected percentage owned that you had for him that day. Your lineups shoot up the leaderboards. You take a stand on a pitcher because you think he's got a matchup versus a lineup that's a great matchup, and everybody else is on the stud pitchers, and you're on this other guy that nobody seems to have. He's 5% owned. He throws 7 innings with 7 shutout innings with 8 strikeouts. your lineups, and you have them in a good core of your lineups, these 5% owned, you have them in 50% of your lineups, your lineups move all the way up the leaderboard and the other people don't. I'm saying not to do it with dart throws, use math. Find the percentage owned, use your projections to find these guys that stand out to you. And don't use this herd mentality of, well, every article that I read mentions this guy. Use the articles to determine the percentage owned. Use all the information. Personally, I'm a data junkie. I subscribe to everything. You know, people say, well, I subscribe to this site, or I read this site's articles. I read everything. The more times I see a player mentioned in all the articles for, daily plays, the more times I see him on cheat sheets, the higher that percentage owned number is going to go. The more I see him being mentioned on Twitter, by some great players that they are being discussed that day, the higher that percentage number goes. And that's what I use to help me determine the percentage owned numbers on a day in every sport. In football, it's even easier because you got a whole week. Baseball, basketball, you got a day. Now we're going to manage those multiple lineups. Not only are you going to have a lot of lineups, if you're going to go with 3 or 5 or 10 or 30 or 50, you got to be able to manage those lineups. Now DraftKings kind of makes that very easy for you. They've got the My Lineups page. This is where I do most of my work on that site. It displays every one of my lineups right there on the My Lineups page. You look at the starting players for that day in baseball. They give you a little green check mark when the starting lineups are announced. You know if your players are in. You can see all the green check marks in there. That's the first thing. Make sure all of your guys are starting. 2, you have to manage your percentage owned. Think about it like a stock portfolio. If you have a certain percentage on a player, let's say you make 10 lineups on a day. We'll keep the math easy, right? You can click Control F. You go to My Lineups page, it prints out all of your lineups. Hit Control F, and that's the find feature. Okay? You type in a player's name that you know you have. It'll highlight that player. It will also show you how many you have immediately, so you can figure out what percentage of your lineups are you exposed to this guy. I have 10 lineups, he's in 5, I have 50% exposure, I think the field's going to have 10% of him, I know I'm overweight on him, I'm okay with that because that's where my research leads me that day. So it's a very quick way to know your exposure to a player. Now, like I said, in football, I'm running 100 lineups, sometimes 150, makes it much easier to get that. The other thing that the find feature does for you with the My Lineups page, it highlights those players. Let's say somebody gets scratched. In baseball, some guys get hurt in batting practice, or a pitcher comes out and they switch the pitcher. All of a sudden, you had guys that were lined up to face a righty, and now they're facing a lefty on that day. You have to get this guy out of your lineup. There's a different play. The math has changed because the equation has changed. The puzzle has changed on the day. Find that guy. It makes it very easy for you. It highlights every one of them. You can take them out of each individual lineup, or you can use a quick player replace if that's easier for you as well. Be sure to check all your lineups. We said this on the last slide. If you hit every lineup, it shows you who's playing and who's not. RotoGrinders has a great lineups page for that as well. It shows you all the players that are in. It shows you their salaries. Check against yours. The worst thing is to just have a dead spot, although in baseball versus basketball, it doesn't kill you to catch a 0 from a guy. Basketball, if you take a 0 on a guy, you're pretty much drawing dead for the night. Just turn off the computer, go to sleep. Baseball, guys go 0 for 4. Even Miggy Cabrera and Mike Trout. It happens. So if you have a guy that's out of the lineup, it's less fortunate. It's not the ideal. It's not what you're looking for, but you're not drawing dead. You're not dead for the night. Maybe that guy gets a pinch hit later in the day, but ideally check your lineups, make sure that you have no dead spots in there. As I said, some of the other sites have, just like DraftKings, have a little check mark to show you who's in and who's out. So if you click on edit lineup, see all those green check marks, click, move to the other one. And if you see that red circle with the line through it, make sure you swap that guy out. Very simple stuff. Stacking, another hot button item. Talked about it in multiple lineups. Sometimes people like to just say, okay, here's every game. I'm going to have a stack of every game. I've done it. We've all done it. It works sometimes, more often it does not. The rules for stacking differ from site to site. DraftKings stacking rule, they have a 6-1-1 rule, meaning you have to have hitters from 3 different teams. You're going to have a maximum of 6 hitters from any one team. Okay, so you can take the hitters that you think fit into your lineup and pick 2 hitters from other teams to plug into that as well. Like I said, there's 2 pitchers. Stacking rules on DraftKings do not apply to the pitchers. So you can have 6 hitters and then the same pitcher from that team. Let's say you want to stack the Dodgers and play Kershaw. You can do that. Other sites, some of them have 5 players from one team, some have a 4 max from one team, and some of those sites, I think FanDuel as well, uses 4 max from one team, and that includes the pitcher. So if you're using a pitcher from that team, you can only use 3 hitters from that team with him. Final thoughts. The thing that I really like about GPPs is that I get to be creative. I don't have to play the most plus EV play, the highest points per dollar expected play on that day. I get to make decisions versus what I project for the field. I'm a better tournament player than I am a cash game player because of that. I don't like being constrained. As you can see, I'm wandering all over here up on the dais. So for me, it allows me to be a little bit creative. Even if I'm playing 3 lineups, I'm allowed to be creative within a GPP and still have a plus EV expectation because I'm being creative within the rules that I've just set out in this whole presentation. You know, I get to make my decisions and think about what everybody else is doing and then think about what I'm doing. Different players have different GPP strategies, and that's perfectly fine. There's no one way to attack tournaments. There is certain ways you should attack cash games, and Mike and Drew are going to tell you about those coming up soon. But that's why I like GPPs, because I get to be creative, I get to do whatever I want, and it allows you to express yourself as a player. So if you are going to dip into playing GPPs maybe a little more heavily this year than you did last year, take all this into consideration and don't think that you have to follow somebody else's rules or mindsets or plays or this is the right play. There's no right play. It's right decisions. If you make those decisions every single day, you will definitely take down at least one GPP this season. That's it. One, it depends on how many lineups I'm running that day. So if I'm running, like let's say it's a major tournament day, right? Like the monthly promotional tournament, the big one. Usually I'm playing satellites to try and win tickets into those so I can have a lot of entries. I probably don't want to have 100% exposure to a player on a day like that if I'm going to have 20 or 30 or 50 lineups. Because let's say that player rolls an ankle running to first base. You know, all of my lineups are sunk. I will have a large percentage of a player. I remember in football season there was a time when it was pretty clear. It was right after, it was a Titans game against Pittsburgh and later. That it was very clear that Le'Veon Bell was going to get the ball 30 to 35 times and catch it, catch 6 of those a game. He was going to have 100 yards minimum. He had a ridiculously high floor and his price hadn't caught up to it yet. And I was running 100 to 150 lineups on every site at that point, trying to chase down these large GPPs. I probably had about 80 or 85% of Le'Veon Bell in a few weeks. So, like I said, sometimes it comes down to you taking a stand because you think other people are going to be afraid of a number. So if you think that people are going to be afraid of a number on a player, like, oh, this guy's going to be 20 or 25% owned in baseball, this hitter. He's going to be 25% owned today. I'm going to fade him because he's 25% owned and that's too high, as we spoke about before. If you think that guy has a 37% chance of coming through that day, and he's going to be 25% owned, you're probably on the right side of the math, and it's not a bad idea to maybe have 60, 70% exposure to him in your GPP lineups, because especially if I'm running 3 or 5 or 10 lineups that day, I'll put that guy in 7, 8 of them without a problem. But how do I come up with the percentage owned on a player? It's experience. A lot of it comes from, like I said, I monitor Twitter. I've got all the DFS superstars followed and all the different sites and all the tip sites and whatever. I do a show on Roto Grinders. I watch the show before me that leads into it. I get all the different articles. As I said, I subscribe to everything. When you see the same name mentioned by everybody, that guy's going to be pretty highly owned. And like I said, within 5 or 10%, I can kind of get to where I'm going to get. And then you bounce the idea off of other people. You know, it's like I don't make lineups with anybody else. Like I don't have a team. Like there are certain players in this industry that work together and they collaborate their research and they work together and they come up with their, they don't use the same lineup, but they have the same research. I'm basically by myself, but I'll bounce ideas off of all these other people. I'll G-chat Peter, I'll G-chat Drew, I'll G-chat Dave. It's like, hey, what do you think this guy's going to be on today? And I know what my number is, but I want his idea of what his number is, and usually they're pretty close. So when you get your little group of friends at play, and you say, well, what do you think about this guy today? It's like, I think he's going to be like 40% on. I'm like, I don't know, I think he's going to be like 10. Oh, maybe I'm way off on this one. So you kind of crowdsource the answer. It's really just, like you said, it's gut feeling, it's reading the tea leaves of everything that's going on around you on that day, and then it's experience of knowing how people react to that news. Coors Field is the most dangerous fade in fantasy baseball. Like there's times that you do it, or I'm pretty active on Twitter, especially during the day and right at Lineups Lock. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'll say something like, I have 0 of this guy and I'm totally scared. because there's a great possibility that guy could go off. And sometimes it's by design, and sometimes when you're making your lineups, that guy just doesn't fit, and you realize, I really don't have enough of this guy. You know, whoever that guy may be, whatever hitter, whatever pitcher, sometimes it's by design. Sometimes you say, you know what? I think that the number, the percent number that he achieves, the number I need him to, is going to be lower than the percentage owned number, but that still leaves a chance that he could get there. You know, even if there's only a 20% chance that a guy exceeds his projection to pay off versus the percentage owned on that day, there's still that 20% chance that he exceeds it. So like people that faded like DeMarcus Cousins last night, his price was ridiculously low. It's been ridiculously low for like 2 weeks on DraftKings, under 10,000. He's playing like an 11K player. I threw him in like every lineup that I had. Any lineup I could fit him in, I threw him in. I'm sure that people didn't play him because he was only like 25% owned. I don't know his number in cash games. Mike and Drew can probably tell you that. I didn't play cash games yesterday. It was probably higher in cash games. But for me, it was, if I didn't play him, I would have, it's like the chance of him having a huge game was immense to me. So fading him or Anthony Davis would have just freaked me out. So I was like, well, I'm just going to go with these guys. Yes, people are going to win baseball GPPs by stacking. People will also win GPPs in baseball by not stacking. The key to stacking is that certain players correlate with one another. In football, you do it with a quarterback and a receiver or a tight end, some pass catcher, right? Because if he throws the ball and this guy catches the ball, you get the yards on this side, the yards on this side, you get the touchdown on this side, the touchdown on that side. Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson. You know, that's going to come through a lot. Romo to Dez Bryant, that's going to come through a lot. They correlate. Same sort of thing happens in baseball. You get a guy or a lineup against a bad pitcher, 3 righties. Let's use Milwaukee, for example. They got a lot of righties in that lineup. They're facing a bad lefty at Miller. Okay, they're in a good hitter's park. They're against a bad pitcher who gives up a lot of fly balls, does not strike people out. You play the number 2, 3, 4 hitter or the 2, 3, 5 hitter. One guy walks, the other guy gets a double, runners on second and third. The third guy hits a home run. All of a sudden, you've got both runs scored. You have the double, you have the hit. You've got 3 runs scored. You have 3 RBI. You get all sides of it. They all correlate together. So that correlation leads you to want to play these guys that help out each other. And then in a tournament aspect, like you're saying, you know, if a team goes for like 20 runs and you have 6 of their hitters, you capture a lot of home runs, you capture all the runs, the RBIs, the hits, everything else, it can add up. But having those right guys, to me, the key is pitchers. Especially on DraftKings, you have 2 of them. You know, you've got to nail about 50 points from your 2 pitchers on DraftKings. Like, that's my target for GPPs. If I get higher, great. If you hit one pitcher, he has 30 points, and the other guy has like 4, and your lineup goes off, you know, you get 10 runs scored from a team that you played 6 hitters from, somebody else might have that same 6 hitters, but they've got 60 pitching points. So it differentiates you a little by going with 6 hitters because not everybody's going to have them. You get lower percentage owned on some of them. If one of those guys happens to hit, you do great. But Pete has the exact numbers on that. I'll let him touch on that later. Opening day is a tough day for pitchers. One, the margins are slim. You're going to realize that the winning percentage of some of these great pitchers is not 250 or minus 300 like you would normally expect it to be, minus 220. It's going to be like minus 130 because they're going up against another ace. Kershaw's pitching against probably Tyson Ross that day as well. Pretty good pitcher in his own right. As you said, Kershaw's Kershaw, and he's going to do what he does, especially if it's in Petco. Are they opening up down there? Are they opening up in? It's in LA. Okay, so like it's still a pitcher's park. It's not a big hitting environment. So. But his price is a little bit restricted. So like, I haven't looked at all the salaries for pitchers yet for opening day because about 60% of them have been announced. So once we get all the pitchers, we'll be able to say, okay, there's, how many games are there opening day? Is there 15? Is everybody playing 15 or 16 games opening day? Yeah, like there's one the night before, and I think, so like opening week, there's always teams, it's not a normal, everybody plays every day. So let's say there's like 14 games. There's 28 pitchers starting that day. I'm going to focus on maybe the 8 that I think are positive EV, that these guys are good versus their price. They're in a good spot to come through on their number to pay off their salary first. And then after I figure that out, I'll start looking at what I think the percentage owned is going to be. And then after I figure out those 2 things, then I can say, okay, well, these are the 3 that I'm probably going to cycle through most of my lineups or get them in as many of my tournament lineups as I can. No, I'm definitely not just shooting for low-owned guys. A couple of years ago, I won the walk-off or something on DraftKings. And it was like, nobody was going to play the Mets, and they were going to be a really bad Twins pitcher, and it was like 20 degrees. And so I was like, well, this guy's not going to be able to grip the ball, so I'll stack the Mets here, and they were really cheap, so I could afford great pitchers with it as well. And they were all really low, and they scored like 18 runs. So, I mean, it can work. It's not the most plus EV situation. Players are going to be owned a certain number for a reason. Like I said, instead of just throwing darts, if you figure out, I think this guy's in a positive position, and he's going to be low owned, because taking 3 guys off the top, right? Just cut off the top, eliminates the high percentage owned guys, because the guys that are on the top of the sheet are going to be really highly owned, because everybody knows, especially in baseball. Yeah, well, then not necessarily. Like a lot of the time, some of those matchups are platoons. Like Jordy Mercer comes to mind against a lefty. He hits second, sometimes he hits eighth. Hits eighth against righties, second against lefties last year. So like anytime a lefty was on the mound, or if he was in a more positive hitting situation on the road, let's say, against a lefty and hitting second, you get a guy that's really cheap. Or Andy Van Slyke's son, Scott Van Slyke. I already did it. I knew I was going to do it, and I did it. Scott Van Slyke against lefties has this massive platoon split, but he doesn't play all the time, so his price stays low. So if he's playing, let's say in Coors, and he happens to platoon that day against a bad lefty on the Rockies, which there's a lot of bad lefties on the Rockies. Sorry, Pete. One day, dare to dream. He's going to have a really high score in my model for that day, especially if he's hitting in the top 5. If he's hitting, 3rd or 5th or whatever, they're giving guys days off. So those guys aren't always the highest price guys. Baseball, there's platoons, there's guys that don't play every day, they're low price, they're rookies that come up. So you're going to find values in baseball as well. But like I said, you cut those top 3 guys off, you're cutting off 70% of the percentage owned on the day at each position. And in positions like first base and outfield, where they're extremely deep with hitters, you take off the top 3 first basemen on a day. So you're saying, okay, no Miggy Cabrera, no Jose Abreu, and no whoever the hell else that day. That still leaves a lot of guys that hit 30 home runs on a year. So you still got a lot of plus EV situations. Like, okay, Goldschmidt's not in the top 3 today, and he's going to be 4% owned at home against a righty. Guys, thank you very much. That's going to be it for me. Thank you.